What are the comments on there?
It's okay.
Do it now. Good evening. This is Pastor Andrew from Oak Ridge Baptist Church, and I want to Good evening. This is Pastor Andrew from Oak Ridge Baptist Church, and I want to welcome you to our live stream Bible study from the book of Exodus. Studying the book of Exodus, chapter 32, verses 1 through 35. So we're going to be going through a story that many of you guys have heard before, but maybe you haven't studied in depth. This is the story of the Israel and the golden calf. So just give me a minute while I grab something here. All right, Israel and the golden calf. So if you guys remember last week, we spent probably 5 or 6 chapters talking about in depth all of the laws that God had set up for Israel regarding the way that they should worship Him. He had a very specific set of rules in place about how He wanted it to be worshipped by His people. And what we're going to see now is that that these laws are going to be very, very quickly broken by Israel. So right now, the kind of our setting that we're in, Moses is up on the mountain. He's on top of Mount Horeb. The mountain is covered with a cloud. There's lightning flashing through the cloud. And the people are down on the plain, and they've been down there for over a month. And so our passage this morning begins, Exodus chapter 32 begins, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him." Right? So right off the bat, we begin to see a couple of things about God's people. Right? We're seeing that they've been left without Moses for about 40 days. And after 40 days, they're kind of all looking at each other saying, what's happening here? What's happening with this guy? We're not really sure. We're in the middle of the desert. Now, I want to be very clear here. The provision of God hasn't stopped at this point. Right? So God is still bringing them quail every morning, and He's still bringing them manna. They still have water. So they're not in any specific need. They just are getting antsy. Right? They're getting nervous. Now, a lot of us kind of know what that feels right now. This Bible study, we're doing this Bible study in the midst of a nationwide quarantine, as tons of people have spent huge amounts of time at home with their kids, teaching their kids, but also trying to work and dealing with all this stuff, and they don't have answers about what's going on. So we all kind of understand what this kind of antsiness means, right? And so God's people are there, they're in the desert, they're antsy, they don't know what's going on, and they begin to say things that kind of speak out of the condition of their heart. Right? Listen to the way that they talk. And they saw that Moses was delayed coming down from the mountain, and the people gathered themselves together around Aaron. We have this mob that forms around Aaron, and they say, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him." Now, a couple of things right there. Did Moses bring them up out of the land of Egypt? Absolutely not. It was God who brought them up out of the land of Egypt in a very present way, right? I mean, this is not, Moses wasn't like the intellectual mastermind that tricked Pharaoh into letting them leave. Moses was a conduit, and amazing things happened, right? They've seen plagues come and decimate Egypt. They've seen a tremendous amount of damage that has been done to the global superpower of their day. They have watched, right? I mean, this isn't even as if it looks like Moses is doing all this stuff. They have watched as a pillar of cloud has separated themselves from the Egyptian army. They've watched as a pillar of fire has interposed at nighttime. They've heard the voice of God, right? Back in just a couple of chapters ago when we were talking about the Ten Commandments, they stood around the mountain, watched a fiery cloud come down, and begin to dictate the Ten Commandments, right? So they know that God is there. But still, they don't have leadership right now. And so in the absence of leadership, the people do the only thing that they know. And that is to try to manipulate their relationship with God. And so, what do they know? These people have been in Egypt for 400 years. They have spent their lives, and their fathers' lives, and their grandfathers' lives, and their great-grandfathers' lives. Everybody that they've known has been built and set to the job of building monuments to gods that are shaped of animals. That is how they know how to interact with the divine. And so they default to this way of interacting with the divine. And so this is kind of the situation that we find the people of God in. And so Aaron, the brother of Moses, demonstrating a total lack of any kind of fortitude, pretty much gives in, right? So we see that Moses has gone up on top of the mountain. He's left his big brother in charge, and his big brother is not the brains of the outfit, and he's not the backbone of the outfit. He's the voice of Moses, and that's about it. And so as soon as they come to him, he folds, and he says, so Aaron says to them, take off the rings of gold that are in your ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. And so all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now, what's happened here, we have a couple of different imagery that's going on. The first imagery is it is a reverse. What's going to happen right now is an absolute reverse of the last 5 chapters that we've been studying. God has laid out to Israel their laws, and now they're going to make kind of a parody of the laws that God has been laying out to Moses up on top of the mountain, right? So let's think at some of these, right? They are, back when the first thing that they were supposed to do was they were to freely offer their jewelry, right? They're supposed to freely offer their jewelry, and now their jewelry is being compelled from them. Right? So they were freely supposed to offer their jewelry. They were going to have 2 trained goldsmiths fashion them into the fittings for the Ark of the Covenant, right? So they're supposed to melt down all of the gold that they have looted from Egypt as a part of the ministry, or as part of the miraculous leading that God has had, right? They're supposed to melt it down and turn it into a box to hold the symbols of God's ministry to them, right? At no point were they ever supposed to worship the ark. That was never intended. In fact, right, we have very clear guidance from God in the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, right? Second commandment, you shall make no graven images. And so at this point, they have already broken 2 of the first commandments. Commandments, I might add, that they heard spoken to them from a fiery cloud. Now, just as one of those life lessons that you learn in church, if a fiery cloud, if God speaking from a fiery cloud tells you not to do something, don't do it. Don't do it, just don't do it. And yet, Israel, as soon as they have the opportunity, they begin to do exactly what they've been told not to do, right? So They take this, they turn them into idols. They're strictly forbidden from making representations of animals, and they default to this image of a god that they had when they were back in Egypt, the golden calf, a bull calf, right? And so this is the symbol of virility and the symbol of power. It's kind of a symbol of Baal later on, but in this it's just a symbol of virility and power that they've been worshiping, that they've seen worshipped back in Egypt. And they say, and they are told that there is only one God, right? You shall have no other God before me. And immediately they look at the one bull and they say, these are the gods that brought you up out of Egypt. No, they're not. It's not the gods that brought you up out of Egypt. Right? Did nobody say, hey, wait a second, don't you remember the fiery pillar? That led us out of Egypt, right? The plagues and all the rest of it. In fact, one of the plagues was directed against the livestock, right? The livestock that was the specific symbol of this bull god that they're now worshiping. They've watched as the bull god of Egypt was crushed by Yahweh, and yet now they've returned to that same idolatrous worship. Right? They are supposed to offer sacrifices, but the sacrifices that they're supposed to offer are very well defined. They're supposed to be done in a particular way by a particular people who have been prepared in a particular way, and they're only supposed to be done on specific ways. And yet, what do we see? When Aaron saw the calf, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose to play. Right? This is a complete abrogation of everything God is telling Moses up on the mountain. Left to themselves, the people invent a completely pagan, idolatrous religion, and now they have taken the worship of Yahweh, and what have they turned it into? They've turned it into a festival. They've turned it into a party and an opportunity for them to have a good time. They have created a feast, and they have turned and modified the worship of Yahweh into something that will bring them glory. Now we need to understand this. Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 to 21, the people had stood at the base of the mountain. They had heard God. They knew that they weren't supposed to make idols. They knew that they weren't supposed to worship more than one God. As for the rest of the violations, they don't know that they're violations yet, right? Because Moses is up on the mountain receiving the law. But it's interesting that they violate nearly every single command that God is giving Moses up on the mountain right now. It's almost like God knew exactly what they were going to do and was creating laws to stifle the wicked desire of men's hearts. It seems like that because that's exactly what God is doing. Right? God gives us His law, not because He's capricious, not because He is bad, not because He's a despot who wants to control us. He gives us laws because He knows the condition of our heart, and because the law helps contain the evil in our heart. Now, we've talked earlier at other Bible studies about one of the roles that the law has is that the law is our pedagogos. It is our schoolmaster. It teaches us how we're supposed to interact with God. It teaches us what righteousness looks like. And so we see that righteousness does not look like worshiping yourself as an idol. Righteousness does not look like just worshiping God in any way that you choose. Right? We're going to see later on, as we study through the books of the Old Testament, what we're going to see is this reoccurring theme of Israel wanting to worship God the way that they want to worship God. Right? So we're going to see this. We're going to see in just a couple of chapters, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, are going to bring profane fire before God. They're going to worship God in a way contrary to the way that God wants to be worshipped. Right? We're going to see this in the book of Judges as a priest decides that he's going to just kind of set himself up and do his own thing. Right? We're going to see this in the second book of Kings as the Samaritans erect an altar with a golden calf to worship on as a way to keep their people from going to Israel, right? As this kind of political ploy. It's going to wander off into idolatry. We're going to see this even in the story of the good King Uzziah, who wanted to go into the temple himself and offer his own incense before the Lord, right? And in every one of these instances, judgment is meted out on the people because God is serious about determining the way that he will be worshipped. Right? This is more than just an especially Jewish sin, right? We can look at the Jewish people and be like, oh, look at these guys. These are so stupid. Why would you do that? They're living in the desert and they're hearing God. They should totally, I would totally not do that. I would be on the right side. Except that's not what we're supposed to take from this. See, Israel is archetypal of all the sin of all mankind. That's why God chose Israel. Because they were especially archetypal of everything. They were part of this bigger story of mankind always and in everywhere rebelling against the God that made them. Right? This is why we read in the book of Romans that even from the very beginning that we polluted the worship of God into the worship of idols because that is the condition of our heart. Now listen, this is something that is intrinsic to humanity. From the very beginning, think back, all the way back to Genesis 1:1. What is Genesis 1:2? What is the sin that we see here? In Genesis chapter 2, we see that Adam and Eve are in this garden, and they have literally everything that anybody could ever want. They're running. I'm just going to be honest. They're just running around the garden naked with each other, pulling stuff off trees and eating it, and it's great. And they have one law, one rule. That's it. One rule. And it's just, don't eat from this tree. And in the very next verse, we see how that becomes polluted and the people eat from that tree and it breaks their relationship with God. Look, the same thing is happening here to Israel in the desert. It's a parallel. Right? This is the second parallel that we see. First parallel is that they're violating all of the laws that God is giving them. The second parallel, the deeper parallel, is that in a very real sense, Israel is living in a garden. Now, the garden is the desert, but they have everything that they need. They literally, like us now, right? Most of us, when we're being told by the state, all we've got to do is sit down, watch Netflix, and that's our job right now. Just don't go out, don't be in contact with people, don't spread the virus that we have. And it's so incredibly hard, right? All Israel has to do is sit in the camp, eat the quail, eat the manna, and just chill. They've been slaves for 400 years. This is like the best vacation ever. You go out to the desert, you sit down, you have some quail, you have some manna, you just sit there and chill until Moses comes down, and they can't do it, right? In the midst of plenty, in the midst of the presence of God living with them bodily in an amazing way, right? They can't just chill. Because it is the nature of human beings to want to gain control of the relationship with God. How does Satan tempt Adam and Eve in the desert? What does he say? He says, hey, if you just take this one fruit, it'll open your eyes, brother. It'll make you like God. You will know the difference between good and evil. Now, why is that attractive? It's attractive because knowing the difference between good and evil implies that you will be able to choose the good on your own and be as good as God. You will be able to come into the presence of God under your own power. Right? And in the same way, Israel doesn't want to wait on Moses to come down to tell them what their relationship with God is going to be like. They take it on their own initiative to develop this relationship on their own in the way that they want to, so that they can control, not because they particularly love God or because they're particularly zealous for his name, but because they want to control the relationship. They want to create, that's the essence of an idol, guys. An idol is a representation of God that you can control, right? That you can pick it up and you can move it. You can do whatever you want with this idol because you control it. You control the deity. All idolatry comes not from a desire to abase ourselves before God. It comes from a desire to control God, to be in control of our situation. This impetus that all human beings have to worship is twisted by Satan and by our own human nature into something dark as we try to gain control of that relationship over God. Every time man tries to do this, it ends badly. And it ends badly here. We see in verse 7, and the Lord said to Moses, you can kind of see Moses is up on the mountain. He's seeing God in his throne room with the tiles going up into heaven, and it's just this amazing experience. And God's telling him the law, and he's got these tablets that have been written on by the hand of God. And it's this is literal. This isn't like the camp mountaintop experience where you heard some really cool songs and like everything was really cool, and you started talking about the way that you've been doing things you shouldn't be doing. This is like an actual mountaintop experience, like God, like Jesus, everybody, like Moses is up on top of a mountain receiving guidance from God. And in the midst of this, God says, whoa, wait up. Go down, for your people whom you've brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. That corruption hasn't come from somewhere else. That corruption has come from inside of them. That corruption is not caused by a lack of information. It's not caused by God's distance. It's not caused by poverty. It's not caused by want. It's not caused by any of the things that we think cause evil. See, we live in a world that teaches us that we are intrinsically good and that evil comes from outside to pervert that which is intrinsically good. What does God say? No, they've polluted themselves. They have polluted themselves. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I might make a great nation of you. Now look at the offer that's being given to Moses here. God is saying, as he has done on multiple occasions, right? We know that he literally will kill everybody on earth except one guy and create a whole human race out of him. That's what happens with Noah, right? We know from John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist in the wilderness, he says, hey, don't say we're children of Israel, because God can lift up from the very stones children to be of Israel, to be sons of Abraham. And so God says, hey, look, I will straight up kill every single person down there, and I will start over with you, even though you're 80 right now. It'll be great. We'll make a whole nation out of you. And Moses implored God, and he said, oh Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with a great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? So Moses is now interceding between God and sinful people. This is that typology that we talked about before, where Moses is kind of a precursor. He's kind of a foreimage of Christ. Christ will do this for the entire human race. He will intercede between the wrath of God and man. But now Moses is interceding with God for the people. And what does he appeal to? Does he say, well, that would be mean, God, if you were to kill all these people. They're great people, and you didn't tell them anything, and you've been spending a lot. He doesn't say that. What does he say? What does he appeal to? He appeals to God's own name, God's glory. Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them? He says, if you do this, your name will be impugned by the Egyptians. All that hard work that we went to back with the Egyptians will go to waste. It says, turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham and Isaac and Israel, your servants, whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. We have here Moses interceding for the people, and God relenting from his terrible anger. This is the same type of thing that we see almost happen with Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham argues with God and says, hey, what if there's just like one guy? What if there's a couple of people in the town and they go back and forth and around and around? The thing that we need to understand is that God doesn't change. The image that we have here looks like Moses is bargaining with God, but what is really happening is God in his sovereignty is arranging a situation in order to depict the relationship that his son will have with all humanity. Right? That Moses will act as this intercessor. And so Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand. The tablets were written on both sides, on the front and the back. They were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. This is an artifact of God's presence that is incalculable to us. We have no idea what it would be like to have something written by the hand of God, by the very hand of God. But in a very real sense, we do have that because God has written his glory in all of nature, in all of creation. And so when we go outside and we look up at the sky, we can see God writing his glory on the heavens. But this is written in human language on these tablets. The work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There is a noise of war in the camp." Now, this is one of those sites that we have that kind of pop up in the Bible where somebody is going to be really important later on just kind of pops up here. Joshua is here. This is the Joshua who's going to be the Joshua from the book of Joshua, who's going to lead the people in the conquest of the land. He is Moses' right-hand guy. I want you to see what's going on here. Moses is discipling Joshua. Right? Moses is bringing Joshua along with him. He has gone up on the mountain with Joshua. Moses is not an aloof leader that's just off by himself. He is cultivating this young man, bringing him up, training him in the way that he should go. He's not threatened by Joshua. Joshua is somebody who is going to end up leading Israel. And so Moses wants him to see what that is. Brothers and sisters, that's incredibly important for us as we do ministry, that we are constantly looking for people that we can bring along with us, that we can encounter God with, that we can disciple through action. Right? So Joshua is there and he said, there's a noise of war in the camp, right? Because they're having a party that is so loud that you can hear it on top of the mountain. 1 million people having a barbecue and partying down on the floor of the valley. But he said, this is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of a cry for defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. And as soon as this came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made. Now I want you to see this, right? So this is kind of like, if any of you have kids, it's like coming home on a Friday night for movie night, and you've got a pizza, and you've got a thing of ice cream, and it's supposed to be a nice evening, and this is going to be like this great end of the week. And when you come in, the kids have finger painted all over the sofa and lit the carpet on fire and broken the TV because they're just being rambunctious and terrible and bad. Not that I know what this is like from personal experience. I'm totally not coming at this from personal experience, right? And so you have the pizza, and you're like, this was supposed to be a nice time. Why can't we have nice things? And you realize that you're your own parents, and then that's even worse, right? And so you have the picture like, we're not having pizza tonight. You're eating cereal, and you're all going to bed. We're not having movie night, right? That's what Moses is. He's taking. I have these tablets from God that he wrote on. This is the law for you because he loves you. And now, that's why we can't have nice things. And now, what does he do? He takes the golden calf that has been made out of all of the gold that they were supposed to use to build to cover the ark. And what does he do with it? He takes it and he burns the calf in the fire, right? So it's probably gold. It's gold laid over a wooden kind of, so there would be like a wooden statue that would be overlaid with gold. And he's going to burn it, and he's going to grind it into powder and scatter it on the water, and he's going to make the people of Israel drink. He's like, you want a God? Here, let me grind it up. It's like the dad who finds his kid, dipping Copenhagen long cut. He's like, you're going to eat this whole can of Copenhagen, and that's going to teach you a lesson. You like idols, where you're going to eat this idol, and it's going to be inside of you, right? And Moses said to Aaron, right, so he's imposing this on the people. And then Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them, right? I left you in charge, Aaron, What are you doing? Why did you do this? Now, I want you to live. This is where it parallels Adam and Eve again, right? What does Adam do? Because Adam is the one who's been placed in charge by God, right? Adam is the one who's supposed to lead his family and tend the garden. And what happens when God comes to him and there is time for accountability, right? Adam says, this woman you gave me, she totally made me eat this. He abrogates his leadership. He tries to lay responsibility on someone who does not have the responsibility. And this is what Aaron says. And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, they are set on evil. For they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for Moses, the man who you brought up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. So I said to them, let any who may have gold take it off. And so they gave it to me, and I want you to hear this. And I threw it into the fire, and out popped a calf. It was a Christmas miracle. I threw all the gold in the fire, and then this calf comes out of it. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. But Aaron is such a weak man. And he knows that he has screwed up really, really bad. And so he's trying, grasping at straws, to try to find some way for this not to be his fault. And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose, to the derision of their enemies, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered around him and said to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you, and go from the gate to gate throughout the camp, and each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And that day about 3,000 men of the people fell. And Moses said, today you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one each one at the cost of his son and of his brothers, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day. Right? This is why the tribe of Levi is from now on and forever to be the priestly caste for Israel. Because at this one moment in the middle of the desert with the people run amok, they were the stalwarts. Even among all of them having made bad decisions, they were the ones that stood by Moses and returned the camp to order. They went through their own families and they killed all who had not sided with Moses. And they went through and they meted out harsh judgment. Now, we had talked about this earlier, right? Idolatry is a bad sin, right? And so 3,000 people die because of it. 3,000 people die because they committed idolatry in the camp. Do you know what we call this? We call this mercy. Because not 10 lines before, God had threatened to kill everyone. Sometimes when we see the things that God does, we can allow ourselves to come to a place of judgment. We can come to a place where we say, oh, that is terrible. I can't believe that God would do that. Why would he kill 3,000 people for idolatry? That seems so silly. And when we think that, what we're not realizing is that we are created beings. God owns us. And that's a terrible thing for somebody in 21st century America to really kind of think about. We don't like to think that we are beholden to anyone, that we are laws unto ourselves, but we are created by God. He has absolutely the right to determine what we do, what we don't do, how we're supposed to act and interact with him. And when we violate that, he has every right to kill us immediately. And yet God, in his mercy and his goodness, makes the rain to fall on the wicked and the good alike. Right? In his goodness, God stays his hand of judgment. He stays his hand of punishment for 1,000 people who revile his name on a daily basis. Brothers and sisters, I just want to put this into context. We live in a nation that does tremendous wickedness. We live in a nation that has institutionalized the killing of infants. We live in a nation that glorifies every kind of perversion. And yet, God has not wiped us off the face of the earth. In His mercy, He still calls out to us. Right? In His mercy, He still invites us to repentance. Every single one of us has done terrible things, things that are deserving of eternal separation from God. And yet God reaches out His hand to us. Always and forever. Reaches out His hand to us and says, I love you. I want you to come to me and I want you to be my child. I wonder if today, if you will respond. I wonder if you will respond to the call of God, who says, who is on the Lord's side, come to me. God's not asking you to strap a sword to your side. He's not asking you to go and kill your family members. What He's asking you to do is just come to His side. To say, I want a relationship with you. I want to have a relationship with you. This is a precursor of what is going to happen over and over again in Israel, in Jewish life. Right? Over and over again, God's people are going to wander from Him. They're going to wander and do terrible things. And over again, God will say, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, I will return to this land. And they do. And every time they return to Him, God pours out His blessing on them. And the same is true for us. If we will humble ourselves and repent of the things that we've done, if we will turn to Him and accept His Son, Jesus Christ, as our Savior, we will have new life in Him. The next day Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. So we kind of have this image of the day after Mardi Gras, right? Like the day after the party, everybody is like passed out in the street. There's mud and nastiness everywhere. And Moses is kind of like kicking through the camp with the Levites who are trying to return order. He brings everybody, gets them together, and he says, okay, you have sinned a great sin. And now we will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. And so Moses returned to the Lord and said, alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. Now I want you to understand what Moses is saying here. He is saying, I know that we have a special relationship. I know that my name has been written in the book of life. Right? He believes that he and God have a special relationship. He's saying, even though that is the case, blot my name out of that book. I want to lose yourself. I want to lose the salvation that I have in you. I want to lose the relationship that I have with you in order to save these people. Now, he wants to take on himself the sin of all of Israel. Think about that. This is the same feeling that is expressed by Paul when he says, I wish that myself could be damned if it would mean that Israel could be saved. But just as God did not ultimately ask Abraham to sacrifice his son, He does not ask Moses to die to make atonement for Israel. And he did not allow Paul to give up his salvation as an atonement for Israel. There is one Savior. There is one person who has the power to make atonement for all mankind. This is a really generous gesture, but at the end of the day, Moses is nowhere near righteous enough to be able to atone for the sins of Israel. He's really kind of taking on more than he understands when he says, blot my name out from the book of life. See, God has another plan. All of this points towards an atonement that will happen much later on. All of this is pointing to the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. And so God says this to Moses. But the Lord said to Moses in verse 33, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out And the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made a calf, the one that Aaron had made. And so God held the people accountable for their sin. This is the story of the golden calf. And it is a story that all of us is an idol maker. In the heart of every man is a factory, and that factory is set to create idols. Now, I know that we don't worship golden calves. I know that if I were to ask you, well, what's your idol? You might say, well, I guess I watch TV more than I should, or maybe it's sports. The reality is, all of us are idolaters. We are made to worship God, and we take the energy that is meant to go to glorifying God, and we use it to glorify everything else. And maybe if there's a little bit left over, we reserve it for God. So I want to ask you this evening as we prepare to close, to take a moment and to really look into your heart that rules your life. We come to a really interesting place in our culture. We are living in the midst of a time of great fear. We have death that is stalking us. And more than that, we see the economy of our country crumbling. We see the security that we had in full grocery stores is going away. And there's something about fear that's interesting. Fear shows us what we truly worship. A great man said it this way. He said, we worship what we fear to lose. So I want you to take this moment, and I want you to think about those things that you are terrified of losing right now. Those things that you are lying awake thinking about. Those things that are haunting you right now. And I want you to realize that those are your idols. Those are the things that you need to pile at the foot of the cross. They can be good things. Often, good things will own us far more than evil things. The things that distract us and separate us from God are not pagan gods. The things that separate us from God are food and money and family and all of the blessings that God has given us that we have allowed to fill up our life. So I would encourage you, take this time and begin to cast those idols at the foot of the cross. We can do this in different ways. If your idol is money, be generous with your money. Support the ministry of the gospel here at Oak Ridge, or support a homeless shelter, or in the midst of all of this uncertainty, be generous with the things that God has given you as a sign that you do not worship them. If your idol is your food, consider maybe fasting one day a week. We're in the season of Lent right now, and it is a fantastic time to take a day to go without eating. Not as a way to demonstrate that you're some kind of spiritual hero, but as a way of recentering your mind on the things that are true and real and matter. I don't know what your idol is, but you do. Now is the time for you to cast that at the feet of Christ and to live in the freedom that He has brought us to have. Brothers and sisters, I want to thank you so much for coming and joining us this evening, and I want to open the floor up right now to any questions that anybody might have. I'm going to talk to my digital deacon, Tony, and say, hey, Tony, do we have any... Tony Fuentes is here in the classroom with us tonight. He's been answering and on the Facebook live stream. Do we have any questions here this evening? Tony?
Nothing yet.
No questions. Any prayer requests or praises?
No, a lot of people are listening.
Okay. Well, I want to tell you I appreciate everybody listening. If you're enjoying the message this evening, what I would encourage you to do is please like our Facebook page and share this message. If you share this message, then it will be able to be seen by all of your friends, and it will allow our messages that we put out here at Oak Ridge Baptist Church to be more widely disseminated. So if you enjoyed what we were doing this evening, please drop us a line. We'll respond to you in a timely way. Like our Facebook feed, like this particular feed, and also share this with your friends and family. I want to tell you what a pleasure it's been to be with you tonight, and I want to pray for us before we leave. Dear Lord, God, I thank you so much for the opportunity that you have given us to come together, even in the midst of this virus. God, I want to thank you that you have given us the technology to be able to reach the people around us. Now, Lord, I ask that you would be with our nation. God, that you would be with our leaders, that you would give them wisdom to be able to make good decisions, that you would give them peace, that they would stop fighting amongst each other, and that they would make the best decisions for the people that we have. Lord, I ask that a sense of calm would come down on us, that we would know the things that we need to do, and that we would have the courage to be able to do them. If that is staying home, Lord, I ask that you would give us the courage to stay home, that we would glorify you in the ways that you have called on us to do. So, by loving our neighbors well, by loving our communities well, by being a good and faithful steward of the trust you've put in us as a community. Lord, I pray with all of those people who are infected with the coronavirus. Lord, I ask that you would just be with them. God, that you would calm their hearts right now, that you would be with those doctors and those nurses right now who are fighting every single day to keep people alive, or they're going without sleep, that are just fighting this, what seems to them like a losing battle, Lord, that they would know that we're behind them. But more importantly, Lord, that they would know that you are the great healer, and that you are holding them, and that you are empowering them. Lord, I ask that you would give them a supernatural ability to just do their jobs well. God, that they would run and not grow weary, that they would walk and not stumble, that you would just lift them up on eagle's wings and give them the ability to do the things that you've called them to do. Lord, I ask you to be with our truck drivers right now that are on the road, that are keeping the store stocked, all those people that are in essential jobs that can't go home right now, that you would be with their families, that you would help them to be able to provide for them. And Lord, I ask you to be with all of those who have lost their jobs, all of those who will lose their jobs. God, that you would remind them that you are the God who provides.
Yes.
And Lord, that you would provide for them.
Yes.
God, for this and for so many other things, we pray to you this evening. We ask all these things in the strong name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Good night and God bless.